that being said, Jim, let's talk about the world today, and let's just highlight a little bit of some of the issues that is vastly different from what the world was like when the country was founded. We have millions
and even when I was growing up, you know, I'm currently in my 60s, and when I was growing up in the late 1940s, the 1950s and 60s, you know, the things I was taught, the things I was learning, not only at school but also at home, were quite different from what people are getting today. And what was expected from our neighbors and in our communities was different then. You know, for example, I mean, here's one thing that's a bit controversial today, but when I was growing up, it was no big deal at all. At age probably 6 through 15, in my bedroom at home, my dad was a telephone repairman. My mom was a housewife. I had a little sister, and my grandfather was an invalid from a stroke, and he and my grandmother lived in our front bedroom. This was in Little Rock, Arkansas. I grew up with a cabinet above my bed that contained shotguns, rifles, handguns, and hunting knives, plus ammunition. It had a lock on it, but the lock was not closed. So in other words, I had an arsenal of firearms and weapons in my room at my disposal, should I choose to make a bad choice, throughout my entire youth when I was old enough to do harm. Never once, not one time in my entire childhood did I play with the guns, ever. I was taught from as early as I can remember to respect weapons, to treat them in an appropriate way, to rely on my dad to guide me until I learned how to use a weapon and whether and when to use a weapon and how to care for one and so forth. And I happily never found the need to use a weapon in personal defense, and so thank God for that. But I learned to use weapons. And if you go up and down my street when I was a kid, all the other homes had firearms in them and ammunition. It was not like, you know, guns cause crime. No, they don't. Guns just change the nature of the crime. You know, criminals cause crime. Well, circumstances cause criminals. No, because there are also people in those same circumstances who don't go into crime. It's personal choice. And what I'm exhorting our listeners and viewers to do is make the personal choice, make the commitment to become self-reliant, to be the exception to the herd that's charging off the cliff, and to take responsibility first for yourself, and then for your family, and then for your business, and then for your community, and then for your world.
It's so easy to listen to you, Jim. It's like it resonates to the fiber of my being, what you're saying. And it also got me thinking a little bit about my story here. You know, similar to you, I grew up with guns as well. And I know my dad will be eventually watching this video, and I just say this, is that when I grew up with guns, we had a simple rule. The rule was this, is that any time I wanted to go out with my dad and shoot the gun in a safe environment with all the appropriate precautions, we could. And I knew where the guns were, I knew where the ammunition was, and the point here is that I never once ventured out on my own to touch it, even though I very well could, because there was an alignment of trust between my dad and myself relative to that. And, you know, in the same way that you talked about it, while I had everything at my disposal, and it came down to personal choice. And the point is that in today's world, we view, on this topic of guns, incidentally, that it is the cause of many bad things in the world, and many statistics are cited. But the reality is you can kill more people with a car than you can with a gun, and we let people who are 16 years old drive cars, and it's...
Well, plus, if we're going to try and control weapons, we're going to have to control clubs, we're going to have to control knives, forks, we're going to have to control ballpoint pens in the hands of the wrong person, you know, we're going to have to control pillows as a suffocation instrument. I mean, you can't control weapons.
At the end of the day, these two fists can kill somebody.
Yeah, there you go.
It's not about weapons. It's about personal choice and holding people accountable.
See, my grandson is currently 13 years old, and last week my wife and I went to his final testing and awarding of his black belt in Taekwondo. Well, my little 13-year-old grandson can kick my ass, but he wouldn't, thank God. But, you know, that's the whole point. I mean, he has learned to use his body as a weapon if need be, but more importantly, in going through the Taekwondo training, he has learned the discipline, the respect for his elders, the respect to the process, the knowledge of knowing the limits of what to do and what not to do, and he also recites every time they go to one of their trainings, he recites this creed that talks about honor and respect and duty and, you know, that sort of thing. None of it's about war, none of it's about hurting, none of it's about harm. It's all about being you know, an honorable individual. And that's the whole point. That's what we've got to get back to. It's like religion. You know, people have issues all around religion, and many justifiably so. But the point of religion, the reason it exists in a culture of human beings, is that those who have figured out an effective way of understanding the world and their part within it get together with other people of similar understanding, so similar beliefs, and they find ways to practice those beliefs. And in a religion that's healthy and promotes life as opposed to that's angry and takes life, in a healthy religion, all of the basic religions of the world, the healthy religions, have those things in common. You know, that they see that there is a greater good than themselves. There's a reason to be good besides just the selfish level reasoning on that. There's a reason to help, to make a difference, to contribute. And there are other people that you can connect with that nurture that. So that's, you know, that's why we need the effect that is created in religion and government in our society. You know, of course, anytime a group of people get together, somebody's got to be in charge first. But even though the father is traditionally in charge of the family, the wife and the kids get a vote. They get input, you know. And if they don't, then the father's a tyrant. And, of course, the family grows up like a bunch of cowed, beaten people. But in a healthy family, everybody gets to talk, and somebody who's typically the most enlightened of the bunch makes the final decision, and then the rest of them follow that commitment. So that's the way our government ought to work. The people are in charge, not the governing politician.
It comes back to the idea it's a government by the people, for the people. That's where a republic is, and that's where that's what government was about back when the country was founded. It's public servants, right? The whole idea of public servants makes me smile. They work for the people, right? That's who they're supposed to be accountable to. So that being said, Jim, let's jump into the next part of this as we key things up for our blueprint and talk about the world today. You know, we've talked about the world in the past. Let's talk about the world today. And I'll throw out the first comment that I see, and that is when we talk about dependency versus being self-reliant, there are millions of people today who either work for the government or dependent on the government in one shape, way, or another. And the interesting statistic I've seen is approximately 1/3, about 100 million people today, generate an income through their work and pay taxes into a system. And the remaining people in the United States, at least, some of which have certainly contributed a lot to society and have earned their position to retire and have put money into the system. I mean, I'm not negating that. But I'm just saying there's about 100 million people who are supporting 313 million total people, including themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that is really a big challenge.
Well, yeah, because when you look at it historically, the ratio has been vastly different. It was, you know, a small percentage of the people in the government, say, you know, let's use a number just to illustrate it, 20%. And 80% of the people were the productive part of society that is creating products, creating resources, providing services, and feeding the economy itself. So any entity that is primarily government employees, that means private enterprise is squeezed out and everybody is dependent on the people making the policies and the rules. And those are the ones that determine your future, not you. So if I start a lemonade stand and I don't have the government license to have a lemonade stand, then I end up no longer able to sell lemonade. Wow. And if you're the guy who's growing lemons, I'm no longer a customer of yours. And if I'm the guy who's selling fertilizer to the lemon grower, then I've no longer got a customer because you're in trouble. And then, and it goes all the way back to wherever it starts.
Part of my interruption here, but let's take what you just said and take it to the full completion. You're the lemonade stand owner, and you're not able to sell lemons, and everybody up that value chain is impacted. Now, when it comes time to feed your family, and you can't perform this function of selling lemonade, now we enter this realm of dependence. And
that's right.
Now, how are you going to get by when your stomach is rumbling? You're going to have a challenge.
You know what some people would say? They'd say, well, hey, just have the government own the lemonade stands. Yeah, right, like that's going to happen. Okay, and it could happen, but the government, if it owns the business, its goal is not the same as an individual who owns a business. The government's goal in a business is to sustain the business. That's it.
But
an individual's goal is to grow the business.
And where it also gets kind of interesting and perhaps a little controversial is then you end up having a lemonade stand owner who says, maybe what I need to do is work with government to create some public policies that can benefit the lemonade stand industry. And lo and behold, the government has now become a partner in the lemonade stand business, which hurts perhaps other lemonade stands which are not involved in the same level of involvement.
Well, plus, yeah, I might find that my local customer base doesn't like lemonade, but they love orange juice. And so I make a deal with you to provide oranges, and I start making orange juice, and then the government comes back and says, hey, you can't do that. Why? Because all the people are coming to you for orange juice, you've got a monopoly. Monopoly's not fair. So we'll let other people come up with their own orange juice. No. You've got to share your technology. You've got to, and then all of a sudden, decisions that would have been made based on what's going to work and what's not are now made based on what's fair and what's not. Now, fairness is a concept that makes everything go the wrong direction. I'm not saying fairness is a bad idea. I'm saying fairness is not a good policy.
You have to have an objective way of measuring success, and when private industry is punished for being successful, there's a problem. And just to add a little bit more fuel to this interesting fire that we're brewing to then show you how we're going to get out of this mess, is that when we think about the world today, I mean, many of you watching these videos are very well informed, and you know that the dollar is international reserve currency, that all other currencies peg their value to. And as you know, right now we have a monetary system that is expanding through increasing debt, which is just a fancy way of saying we're printing digital money. And the impacts of all of this, the very real impacts to you who's watching this video, is that the costs of your production is going up because of inflation. That means it's going to be harder for you to generate a profit in the future with this expanding debt. Number two, the taxation factor and the bureaucracy of doing business is I would say on an upward trend that becomes more difficult to do business. And ultimately this results in having to do more with less, and to do so with less staff. And that's where this big challenge is continuing to erupt, because we are not acting as a society in a self-reliant way, and we are trying to paper over all of the expenses that we have, which isn't going to last forever.
Mm-hmm. Every time you put a government in charge of an enterprise, the enterprise becomes, over time, less efficient. And one of the classic examples, I remember Rich DeVos, one of the founders of Amway, he told about this in a speech. He said in Russia, this was back 20 years ago, he said in Russia they've started allowing private ownership of farms, and in a few exceptional situations. He said, but the government owned all of them. This was the USSR. This was back in the day, right? The government owned almost everything, but they had allowed, as an experiment, a few farms to have private ownership. And what they found was the productivity coming out of the private farms was like 10 times greater than the productivity coming out of the government farms. And yet it was the same farms that had previously been owned by the government. And they asked why. And then they realized that in the government farms, the farmers at dark would park the tractor and go back to the house. And on the private farms at dark, the owners, the farmers, would put lights on their tractors and drive it on into the night to get the job done. So they were committed to the outcome, not committed to the process. That's the definition of a bureaucrat. Someone who is more committed to their process, their procedure, than they are to the effect that it has. You go to a government agency, and it's not uncommon to encounter someone that says, you should have been here yesterday, and that's somehow supposed to make you go away. You say, well, I couldn't have gotten here yesterday, so what can I do now? Well, I'm sorry, but the rule says you should have been here yesterday. Yesterday was the deadline. In a government agency, that makes perfect sense. In a private business, you say, okay, I understand, maybe there's a penalty, let's make it right. What do I need to do? So in a bureaucracy, it's all about, did you complete these steps in this order, using these forms? Do you have these stamps and these signatures? Not, is this going to work? And in private enterprise, it's always, is this going to work? If so, then we'll do all these other things. But if it's not going to work, let's just don't do this, right? And you're constantly looking at the ratio of what it takes, your commitment, to what it pays, your payoff, your result. So completely different type of thinking. Now, look at the U.S. today. We have an enormous number, millions of people working for the government, working in government jobs, many of which, tens of thousands, have been proven to be useless jobs. Jobs in agencies that no longer have a reason to continue to exist. We also have laws that have no particular reason for existing, and yet they're not reviewed and then discarded or replaced. Okay? So anytime you've got government growing, 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 then you've got to ask, okay, what if it outgrows its usefulness? Well, then you just eliminate it? No. What happens is, if you give the government the ability to unionize the government workers, then all of a sudden the government workers can go against their employer, which in this case is you and me, the people. They can actually take legal action against us to get themselves greater benefits, like their pension fund, their privileges, the time off, health care, services, and so forth. When that happens, then the government is voting itself through the legal system more and more good circumstances, while you and I as taxpayers are having to come up with more and more money from where? From whatever we're doing for a living in order to facilitate their growth. And the government, when it gets as big as ours is today, starts intruding into people's lives. They say, Ray, I don't like the way you're doing this. You can't do that anymore. We got a new law. You say, well, wait, I didn't vote for that law. Doesn't matter. You put us in charge, and we decided it's a law. And so you start executing executive orders and things like that that are outside the process. Oh, my God, how dysfunctional is this whole thing?
I enjoyed what you said, and it got me thinking. As some of my readers know, my family came from a communist country. And when you talked about the farm in the private sector and the farm in the government sector, it really rang true from some of the stories that I heard about my ancestors and what they went through, and the huge penalties they paid for trying to essentially exist in a happy manner, in a productive manner. I won't go into too much detail on that, but what I also wanted to circle back on is when we talked about earlier on about what self-reliance meant when this country was formed, and we're looking back and saying, what does it mean now? Let's just think about it. Food. Today, we are completely dependent on a just-in-time food system. If oil prices go up, which they are, and trucks do not arrive to the supermarket, you're not going to have food to eat beyond 5 days from now. The average person does not have more than 5 days of food that they can exist on.
Yeah. Well, look at fuel, gasoline. How many people have any reserve gasoline at all? They've got what's left in the tank, and they're dependent on their local service stations to have fuel when they go there. I remember in 1974 that dried up for a while.
if we take a look at, for example, the education system, we already talked a little bit about this, but in today's education system, you can go all the way through grade school, high school, and college and not know how to balance a checkbook or how to relate to somebody in a sales process, which is fundamental in any business. All right. Yeah. What about the idea of defense? We talked about our stories with guns, and every time something bad happens or somebody takes a bad action, they go after the tool, not the psychotropic drugs that most of these kids are on that commit these crimes. So the point is the role of government has changed, the role of education has changed, the idea of how we exist and with food and shelter and defense, everything has changed. And
the role of representation has changed, like the legal system. You can sue somebody for almost anything. You can sue somebody for looking at you in a disrespectful manner. Imagine that. Looking at you in a disrespectful manner.
Right, right. So that being said, here we've been really beating the drum here, so to speak, because Jim and I mutually talked before this video, and we want everybody who's watching this to understand that the idea of self-reliance is so core to who we are as people, to be able to have the freedom to pursue your dreams and make life better for yourself, for your family. And this video series that we're not going to go into deeper is really for people who are looking to be problem solvers and people who are looking to understand the truth and embrace objective reality to better themselves and the people that they care about. Yeah. And
people who want to be free on every level. Yeah.
I think we also think that, and you're gonna see this in our blueprint. We want you watching this video to emerge from this with a new sense of awareness, to be more confident about who you are and what you can contribute in society, be more competent, and be able to really live your best life. I think that's one of the goals. Jim, anything else you'd like to say in terms of who this video is for and what some of the goals are for them?
A good parallel to this is looking at the role of a manager. I look at the role of a manager of people as being to become progressively less necessary. Now, what I mean by that is that if I'm the manager of a group, a team of people, my job is to help them develop the skills of self-reliance that allow them to do their work well and even do it better than I was teaching them to do it without my presence or my involvement. So the more I teach them to become self-reliant, the less they need that level of me. And the more I can progress to something else and bring even greater value. But if I don't teach them to be self-reliant, then I teach them by default to become dependent on me. And everything says, well, we can't do this. Jim's not here. He makes those decisions. I'm sorry, I don't have the authority or the wisdom to make this choice. You're going to have to wait till the boss gets back. So the role of a boss is to become less necessary. The role of a parent is to become less necessary. Let your children need you for the love you show them, not for the skills that you possess, because you want to impart everything you know to them in the best possible way, with the goal being them to be less dependent. Now, let me give you a quick example. My son, when he was young, he said to me, "Can I go to Jason's house to play?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because 3 nights this week out of these 4, you've been to Jason's house, and you need to give it a rest." And he said, "Well, Dad, there's no real reason for me not to go to Jason's house to play." And I said, "Jim," his name's Jim Jr., I said, "you're going to have to trust me on this one." I said, "I know when enough is enough. You don't." He said, "I don't understand." I said, "I totally get that because you're only, a few years old." I said, "So you got to trust the fact that I love you and I will make good decisions on your behalf. I'm guiding you wisely. I'm not doing it selfishly to make me feel good. So, no, you can't go to Jason's tonight." He said, "Well, I don't understand." I said, "Well, let me put it in a different way. When you were a little baby, if I wanted you to go across the street, I would pick you up in my arms and carry you. And as you got older and you could walk, I realized you had a new skill. So I would let you walk beside me, and I would hold your wrist with a death clamp that you could never get away from me to keep you safe as we went across the street. And when you got a little older, I'd say, 'Hold my hand,' and now it's you holding me instead of me holding you. And then I said, okay, walk right beside me, and we didn't have to hold hands because you're getting older, you're getting more capable, you're learning more. And then finally, I got to the point where I said, be careful, look both ways before you cross the street. And then as you develop the ability to make better decisions and the physical ability to do the things that were needed, I could say to you, you could say to me, I'm going out to play. I'd say, fine, be careful, have fun. And you had total freedom because you had been through the steps of acquiring the skills for self-reliance. Without that, I would still be carrying you across the street at your current age in your 40s.
I love that story. It really shows the process of development and learning. And from a business standpoint, when we look at a first-line person who's working with a customer, how many times have you gone into a business and you had a problem that you wanted to get solved, and someone told you, I can't do that, I'm not allowed to do that, I can't make that kind of decision, and it just turns you off as a customer. And in other organizations, you see the individual being a problem solver, taking accountability and responsibility for that customer interaction.
You want to hire them away.
Exactly, and you want to hire those individuals because they basically solve the customer's problem and ask for forgiveness later, as opposed to asking permission to begin solving the customer's problem. So this idea of self-reliance is in the individual world, as a parent, as a business owner, as an employee in the business world, it's needed everywhere.